somebody in our locality that we can continue to benefit from and continue to join us here at the madrasa and also around it. He's hosts weekly gatherings as well. After the event, feel free to be in touch with him, how you can connect to him. I think people like this around the Northwest, we do need to be in their company much more than we are perhaps doing at the moment. The speakers before me have been discussing that connection with the Prophet ﷺ, which is what our primary purpose of being here is about. As I was mentioning in verse 8 earlier, قَدْ جَاءَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ نُورٌ وَكِتَابٌ مُبِينٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have indeed sent amongst you a light and a manifest book, referring to the Holy Quran. And this light that came of the Prophet is, if you look at every tafsir, you'll find that every mufassir, beginning with the Sahaba onwards, will say this light, this nur refers to the Prophet ﷺ. And this nur was a nur which was nur hissi, it was a physical nur which blessed not only this world but the entire universe in its different ways. And we know the riwayat that when the Prophet ﷺ was born, his mother, blessed mother Sayyidah Amina, actually witnesses a light emerging to the extent that she could see the palaces of Sham. That nur had that much power that the people there were able to witness, even those Usul Sham across. And there's lots we can say about this, but this was referring to the talab of the Prophet at his coming, that those palaces belonging to the Caesar and the Khizr, Qaisar and Kisra were all lit up, in fact, had been shaken. In fact, there's a narration in Bayhaqi that 14 of its balconies were shaken and came down. But that nur was not just a one-off nur that emerged in this dunya and then disappeared. It's a nur that we carry in our hearts continuously. And that connection to that nur is our purpose of being gathering. Our gathering here today. Many people ask, what is the purpose and the maqsad of doing the Mawlid al-Nabi gatherings that you do? Primarily it is to establish that connection. And a verse of the Quran was coming to my mind, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. Indeed has come to you a messenger from amongst yourself. Azizun alayhi ma anittum. And he is concerned by your suffering. Our suffering grieves him. It causes him distress when we suffer. Harisun alaykum bil mu'minin. And he feels anxious. He feels anxious for us, for our well-being, for our goodness. Bil mu'minina ra'ufun rahim. And to the believers, he is ra'ufun rahim, he is merciful. Now just think about this verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. First of all, being from amongst ourselves, Azizun alayhi. This is the first sifa. Ma anittum. So our suffering concerns him. Azizun alayhi. Anittum. In other words, what we suffer. And he is haris for us. Now these are very beautiful words in the Arabic language, which is very difficult to render them into the English language. And if you just scroll through some translations, you will see that translators often will diverge in the way that they translate these words. Quite difficult to express in English. And it was an exercise that I did try to do to see how do people translate some of these words like Aziz and Haris here. I'm just going to go through some of these translations. We have somebody in the audience with a PhD on Quran translations and comparative between those Quran translations and how they render certain words differently. And I will read some of these here for you. So they say, certainly has come to you a messenger from amongst yourselves. He is concerned by your suffering, anxious for your well-being. Another translation, they're all very beautiful by the way, and these translators come from different ideological backgrounds. It's not that they all from the same manhaj or way of thinking, they're different backgrounds. A messenger who feels it very hard on him if you were to face a hardship, who is very anxious for your welfare, and for the believers he is very kind, very merciful. Another translation. Grievous to him is what you suffer. He is concerned over you, and to the believers he is kind and merciful. Your suffering distresses him. He is deeply concerned for you and full of kindness and mercy towards the believers. Perhaps one more, the list is quite long. About the Messenger of Islam, again the same verse. Who is distressed by the losses you sustain, who is ardently desirous of your welfare and is tender and merciful to those that believe. These are various ways that you can translate Azizun alayhi ma'anitum wa harisun alaykum bil mu'minin. Now if you focus on the verse is actually telling you the Prophet ﷺ's connection to us. What we mean to the Prophet ﷺ, to the point that when we are facing difficulty, it grieves the Prophet ﷺ. It causes him concern when we are suffering. That's the connection of the Prophet ﷺ to his ummah. And what we are doing today here is attempting ourselves to connect to the Prophet ﷺ in the way that he is connected to us. And we know from the various traditions the Prophet ﷺ would stand in prayer, crying for his ummah. Allahumma ummati, ummati. Spent his life concerned about the believers to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel alayhi salam to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him what his concern was. And he said his concern was the ummah. And the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, gave him a guarantee for the pardoning and the saving of his ummah. There is one interesting thing also about this verse. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ. This is the way that the verse is recited, the qira'ah among the jama'ah of the Qur'an. But there is another qira'ah for this ayah, which is anfus is the plural of nafs. Plural of nafs, nufus and anfus. There is another qira'ah which reads لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِنْ أَنفَسِكُمْ. Min anfasikum. And if you read the verse with anfasikum, now rather than being a plural of the word nafs, which is anfus, this becomes in Arabic what you call an ism tafdeel, the comparative degree. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ is the greatest amongst you. A messenger has been sent in ashrafikum. And this qira'ah was the way that Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra would read this verse. And when I came across this, I was really surprised. And a really beautiful feeling actually, that this is the qira'ah of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra, that she would read it as anfasikum, rather than anfusikum, and also Sayyidah Aisha. Even though the majority qira'ah is different, but it's a very beautiful rendering of the verse that says it's what of in the comparative degree. Meaning that he is the most honorable and the greatest. The Prophet has come from the greatest from amongst you. So that's the connection of the Prophet to us. What we want to do then is establish our connection to the Prophet in the way that he wept for us. And his major concern was his ummah. We should reflect on what are we doing to establish our connection with the Prophet. And there's lots more we can say about this. But the first recourse we take to understanding this is to understand how the Sahaba and his own family were to the Prophet ﷺ, what kind of concerns that they had for the Prophet ﷺ. And maybe I'll just mention one point because we are a little bit pressed for time. The Prophet ﷺ's concern for us is very clear. Much we can say about this. But in terms of the way that the Sahaba would build their connection with the Prophet ﷺ, one of the narrations that comes to mind is Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He comes and sees the Prophet ﷺ, and he was sleeping on a straw mat, lying down on a straw mat. And when he was awakening and got up, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he sees the marks of the straws on his waist and back. And when he sees this, he could not hold himself and he begins to cry. The Prophet ﷺ has these marks from sleeping on a straw mat. I want you to also reflect of the simplicity of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, in the way that he would spend his nights and the way that he would live. Sleeping on a straw mat. And in the house, in the same report that I mentioned, what mentions how he would sleep, there was just to eat some dates and some barley, that's it. That was the food that he would consume. In fact, the narration of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, that when the Prophet ﷺ would pray his salah and do his sajda, the space in the room was so tight that she would have to bend her knees in order to make way for his sajda. That tells you how small the room was and how small the dwelling of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a palace. Although he was able to do that. In fact, when Sayyidina Umar sees these marks on his waist, he says, "Oh Prophet ﷺ, why are you living in this way? Look at Caesar." In other words, Caesar. And look at Kisra. And look at the way that they live. And he's in tears saying to see the Prophet ﷺ living in this particular manner, whilst he is in this very, sleeping in very simple ways, with marks on his waist. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Why are you crying for? Why are you crying, Ya Umar? Are you not satisfied that they have these luxuries in this dunya and will be deprived of them in the next, whilst we have sabr and this zuhad in this dunya and we will be blessed with it in the hereafter? This is sufficient, should be sufficient to make you happy, not to weep. Complete patience and happiness in the way that he was." In fact, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ and talking about connection, despite being, as we said, the greatest of Allah's creation, and we take that qira'ah of Sayyidah Fatima again, of min anfasikum, the way that she would read it, min ashrafikum, amongst the greatest of you, but then see the humility by which he lived. And that life was not an easy life. And we often forget that the Prophet ﷺ, from the beginning, from the moment that he opened his eyes, it was a difficult life as well. He was born as he was born, his father had already passed away, born an orphan. And not long after, his mother had departed from this world. How old was he when his mother passed away? 6. And brought by his grandfather. Grandfather passed away when he was 9. So if you want to think about how people would connect to the Prophet ﷺ, those that connect to him most immediately are those that have faced such kind of suffering and difficulty. For anyone who's lost a parent, it's difficult for someone who hasn't gone through that to be able to empathize and understand what that means. The most difficult thing that anybody could go through is at a young age losing a parent. It's happened to the Prophet ﷺ. Lost his, born without father, lost his mother, then his grandfather. The only solace that we have when we look at real hardship facing the Ummah in places like Palestine, And then you can imagine what's happening, and people are losing their fathers, grandfathers, uncles. And remember, the Prophet ﷺ also lost his uncle, Sayyidina Abu Talib, and his wife. In fact, that year in which those two passed away, his beloved uncle, who was very dear to him, and his beloved wife, Sayyidina Khadija. That was the only woman that he was married to at the time, and the most beloved of his wives, Sayyidina Khadija. The year that they passed away, the same year by the way, and the Arabs would often mention or label the years at that time not by numbers but by events. The Hijrah calendar starts later. And that year in which they passed away is called Aam al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. So there's a whole year in his seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a year of sorrow. A year of hurt and upset. When he lost his uncle, who was his protector, in that world Allah is his protector, but after that his uncle mentioned in the Quran as well. He's been referred to as his protector in the Quran. And he lost his beloved wife. 5 of his children out of 6 he saw in his own lifetime perish and pass away. 5 of his children out of 6. It's only Sayyidah Fatima who survived him, and even she passed away 6 months after his own demise. So you can imagine what kind of life the Prophet ﷺ had lived through. Also, another thing that's very beloved, these all are hub fitri, by the way. It's mahabba that you have towards parents, towards children. These are all from the fitrah of humankind. So the Prophet ﷺ was facing the greatest difficulties and challenges and pain that a human being can suffer in their personal life. Another thing that we have natural love for is our land, our watan. And the Prophet ﷺ was literally, we would find it a little bit disrespectful saying this, but it's true. He was expelled, forced to leave his land. Again, think about Palestine today. This is a history that we are associated with. Our ummah and our beloved brothers in Palestine. I know one of our brothers from Gaza is here in the audience as well, who said faced great tragedies in his own family. So the Prophet ﷺ had to leave the land which he loved most, which was most dear to him. And we are blessed today that our main speaker is from Makkah, from that city of the Prophet where he was born in Makkah. And when he left Makkah, it's a very emotional image, if you can picture it. He turns back and he looks towards Makkah when he's leaving, not by choice. He turns back and he looks at Makkah and said, if they did not expel me from this land, I would have never left you. If they did not force me to leave, I would never have left you. So he had to leave by being expelled and forced out of the land. His closest followers were oppressed, persecuted by those Zalims of the Quraysh. And then he goes in Medina, another great difficulty that he faced. Whilst there is freedom in Medina and the religion starts to spread, he's faced with hypocrites, munafiq among his ranks. There was nifaq. And of course problems and difficulties from other religions there. Those people from Quraysh also challenging him, forcing him into war. So these are difficulties and tragedies and pain after pain that he suffered throughout his lifetime. Yet the Prophet ﷺ never wavered when he would meet somebody from smiling towards them. Somebody who faced the most difficulty was seen as the person who was the most smiling towards people and meeting people in the best possible manner and not letting it overcome him. Being the most generous. There's a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ when he was praying the Salah and he hurried in his Salah. The Sahaba said, why did the Prophet ﷺ hurry in his Salah today? And he said, because I remembered that there was some gold, there was some wealth, what was remaining in my house which I had not distributed. And it concerned me that that was still in my house and I wanted to distribute it to the poor. In fact, just before the Prophet ﷺ was leaving this dunya, he says to Sayyidah Aisha, one of the things there were 2 things that were distressing him. Not about himself, and he wasn't fearing his own life, which many people would do. Two things. One was the state of his ummah, our hal, and the other was there were 6 or 7 gold coins. And it says to say that Aisha, where are those 6 or 7 gold coins? Give them out in sadaqah. He did not want to leave this world being possession from anything from this world. And she was concerned for his well-being and said, you know, think about your health. Yet the Prophet ﷺ ordered her and said, give me the 6, 7 coins in my hand. Took hold of them and wanted to distribute them before he left this world. And that's why it's a progressive order actually. It says, दो जहां की नेमतें हैं उनके खाली हाथ में यानी नेमतुल कौनैन फी यदैहिल खालिया. So he had everything in his 2 hands, had everything of the world, yet his physical hands always remained empty. To the point that this was not only his, this is a manifestation of his mercy, by the way, a manifestation of the mercy. And the rahmatul lil alameen of the Prophet ﷺ extends to us. And that's why another beautiful narration in which the Prophet ﷺ, when we're talking about Islam, by the way, it's quite difficult. I was talking about hub fitri. So the ulama talk about a love that somebody has which is natural, fitri meaning natural. Even the love we have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fitri, by the way. You see the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you see his ayat, you ponder within yourself, and your logic will reach you to the conclusion that you have a creator. And it's natural to love your own creator. It's natural to love your parents who brought you into this world. It's natural to love your children. If anybody does it, you think this is very unnatural and very strange. This might sound odd to you. But the ulama say to love the Prophet ﷺ in its immediate sense is actually not from fitri. It's not from fitri, from natural love. Because it's not your, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your creator, your parents brought you into this world, your offspring is those like you brought into this world by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But loving the Prophet ﷺ is not from the fitrah in that sense. It's not from the fitrah in that sense. That's why there are some, like Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, who said, the Prophet ﷺ in this sense is also from the ghaib. Not for the Sahaba, by the way, for us who came after him. For us, in that sense, it's from the ghaib. Or building that relationship will take your connection out of the ghaib and into the present. That's what these gatherings are about. To bring the Prophet ﷺ not from the ghaib but into their present. By what? By discussing the stories that we are telling today, by discussing his seerah, by having Sayyid here talk to us about the Prophet ﷺ, is what brings us into our hearts. And a beautiful tradition also is when the Prophet ﷺ talks about his brothers and gives them glad tidings. Tuba, words that are used in the hadith. And the Sahaba said, are we not your brothers? And he said, you're not my brothers. You're my ashab. My brothers are those that will believe in me, yet they have never seen me. He referred to us as his brother. Our adab, we cannot refer to the Prophet as our brother. This is an important point of adab and aqidah, which some people get mistaken. We can't do this. The Prophet referred to us collectively as brothers. We can't do this out of adab, but this is how he referred to us as brothers. And in the other narrations, he refers to the iman of those that, when he said, do you know whose iman is ajib, who's strange? The Sahaba thinking maybe they said, your iman is not strange, you're with me, you've seen me, you've been with me, you saw the revelation. The angels, no. La yasuna Allah, they are under Allah's command. Ours. Iman is the one that's considered strange. And in one narration, double. In another narration, the glad tidings that we got and the reward is 7-fold. Sab'a. 7-fold reward for being connected with him and believing in him. So we have not yet seen him, and that hope is called hope ikhtiyari. It's a hope that is developed, that is inculcated, that grows upon you. And when we read about his life, when we read his seerah, we see that love inculcated within our souls. To the point, by the way, it's not a natural love. Yet we are ordered that we have to love somebody that we have not seen. And love him more than anybody else, including our own parents. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إلي من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. More than everybody else, we have to love the Prophet ﷺ. Yet that hub is a hub ikhtiyari. If you try to juxtapose these two ideas together, maybe confusing for people that we're ordering to love somebody more than our parents who we have never seen. But yet if we look across this ummah, after the, let's say, the time of the Sahaba, at least they saw the Prophet, although they were not related to him. And we know the narration of Sayyidina Umar when he said he wasn't sure yet if he loved the Prophet more than himself. And then when he was told that his iman is not yet complete, and he pondered on it and he said even more than our own nafs. So we love the Prophet ﷺ. This is from iman. No difference of opinion whatsoever with this. That we have to love the Prophet ﷺ in order to be proper believers more than our own selves, our parents, our children, and anything else in this dunya. And that's why when I talked about the Prophet ﷺ being an orphan, his love that he had for the orphans, his love that he had for children. ليس منا لم يرحم صغيرنا ولم يوقر كبيرنا. He is not from amongst us who does not show mercy to the young ones and show mercy and respect to the young ones, and does not have respect for the elders. I mean, this could be a very long lecture, I guess, because you can look at every facet of his life in connection to the verse that I just recited, but I will mention one of them. Many different ones I can mention, but I will mention one narration with children. The ones about orphans, you've probably heard some of them, especially because we have a lot of charity telethons on television, but they mention many narrations regarding the orphans. There was a child. He was the son of Abu Talha. And he was related to Anas bin Malik from, he was Anas bin Malik's brother from the mother's side only. And he had a bird called, and this bird they refer to as Nughail, like a sparrow, a small bird, Nughail. And one day the Prophet ﷺ saw that the son of Abu Talha is without his bird. The bird, he'd lost the bird had died. And when he sees him, he says, Ya Aba Umayr, ma fa'ala al-Nughail. His name was not, he did not have a Qadria of Abu Umayr at the time. This is normally given for elder people. But as a child, he gave him a laqab, a Qadria. A Qadria, Abu Umayr, which rhymed with Nughail in order to console his heart. Because he had lost his bird. So he says, oh Abu Umayr, what happened with Nughail? And every time he would see him, he would say the same phrase. This is the attention that he would give to children. Alayhi salatu wasalam. And when we mention the word Rahmatul lil Alameen, we have to really understand what does Rahmatul lil Alameen mean. We know that the animals will come, mentioning the bird Nughail, the animals will come and complain to him. Because his rahmah was not only confined to human beings, but to all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Always kind, always merciful. Even to those who are his enemies. And we know about those that are his enemies that he forgave. And those that embrace Islam. Shaykh Hassan Rabani, who inshallah will say a few words also, inshallah next. We were discussing this actually yesterday about how enemies who did the most atrocious things to him and his family were forgiven. One narration I'll mention also is that the Prophet ﷺ is walking, Sayyidina Anas relates this, and he's wearing a burqa, a cloak, which is referred to as a Najrani burqa. And somebody comes, a Bedouin, and starts to pull on his cloak, violently. Pulling on his cloak, and the collar of the cloak was quite coarse anyway, And it pulled on his neck to the point that it made a mark on his neck. It made a mark on his neck, an imprint. That's how hard he pulled it. If you think how we would react to that situation, we'd get angry, perhaps violently. And he says to the Prophet ﷺ, give me something from your wealth. Give me something from your wealth. The Prophet ﷺ didn't react in a rude manner, or argue back, or order for him to be beaten. He did the opposite. He smiled at him and ordered for something to be given to him. And this is the way that people embrace Islam. I'll just finish on this point. This is just some hints of the Prophet's compassion and his mercy. Yet when the Prophet ﷺ was in battle, he was the most courageous. Not the softest, the most courageous. In fact, we know, for example, in Badr, and this is a riwayah from Sayyidina Ali, the hero of Badr. He said, when we were in Badr and we were fighting, we would often take cover under the Prophet ﷺ. And Sahaba narrate, for example, in the Battle of Hunayn, that when the fighting would get very fierce and intense, life-threatening situations, then the Sahaba, what would they do? They'd see the Prophet ﷺ right at the front. And what we would do is, we would gather around the Prophet ﷺ for protection. He wouldn't leave his companions. Nowadays you see a lot of disloyalty in the world. He wouldn't leave his companions. In fact, where the threat was and where the difficulty was, he'd be seen at the forefront. Many of the narrations about this. That's why this is multifaceted character. Where there is a place for mercy and compassion and kindness, you see that throughout his life. But when it's the time for being courageous and bravery, he encompasses that to its full capacity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be connected to the Prophet in all of these different ways. And even if we were to gain a grain or a drop of his sunnah, and that we can practice that even properly, and that be a means for us to be connected to him, then we have achieved success. I would like to, for a few moments if I can, because my dear brother from Glasgow has also arrived, Sheikh Hassan Rabbani. Sheikh, if you would like to come up and say a few words. We're very honoured that she's come from such a far distance.